The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
Telling the stories of the church, I would say, that has so impacted me over the years, like other people's amazing stories. And so the power of story to encourage each other and keep each other, in the faith even, and just like, oh man, what people do because they believe is a beautiful thing. And so to be part of that storytelling tradition of the church has fed my faith over the years.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Karen Stiller writes about the intersections between faith in the world, social issues, matters of justice, and doing better. Her most recent book is Holiness Here, Searching for God in the Ordinary Events of Everyday Life. In this episode, Karen and I talk about holiness as a matter of loving people well, as opposed to telling them how they've fallen short, and what that holiness has to do with the writing life. We also talk about writing in the midst of grief. Karen Stiller, I'm so happy to have you on the Habit Podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm very excited to be on one of my favorite podcasts.
Oh, well, I'm glad to know that the Habit is one of your favorite, the favorite, top three. How would you?
Oh,
I'm kidding. You don't have to say.
Favorite. We'll say the favorite.
Okay, that's for the next 45 minutes. It's your very favorite podcast. So you have a new book called Holiness Here. And I want to circle back around to the circumstances under which this book was written, because it's a remarkable story. But first, let's just talk about the book itself. You identify early on that holiness has a PR problem. That we think of holiness, we avoid. We have a tendency or an inclination to avoid the idea of holiness or holy people for fear of being what?
One of them.
But you make the case that really holiness is about loving the people around us.
Yes. Yeah.
And so tell me about that.
Yeah. So because this is a podcast for writers, I feel comfortable sharing kind of the fact that I was actively looking for an idea to write about. My first book, The Minister's Wife, came out in 2020. I made a decision that, okay, I think I want to keep going down this book writing path if I'm able, and if I can. And so my mind was, on scouring mode. Yeah. And I was sitting in church one Sunday, one of the pastors prayed, "Give us grace, God, to lead a holy life." And instantly I was like, what does that mean? What does it mean for me? What does it mean for the people here with me? I thought I had a sense of what it meant for, my husband, the priest, his friends up there, his cronies. And that gap also always interested me, knowing that people assumed clergy were like hyper holy. And I knowing full well that, clergy are people with a calling, and, so are the people married to them, just normal people. So I was really interested in what does it mean to lead a holy life now? And I also had that idea of never quite being on the mark and never quite hitting the mark, maybe. So I really wanted to just kind of do a lot of reading about holiness and just see what came out. And I was very interested in thinking, holiness is a good thing. Like holiness is, we're told we're holy. And so how do we live out of that reality and, kind of accept our own holiness and then love other people in that way? And that it's very practical and it's very spiritual. And, the spiritual is practical and the practical is spiritual. So that's what I'm sort of exploring in the book.
Yeah. I love you quote J.I. Packer. Now I don't have the quote in front of me, but in essence, part of loving people in a way that acts out holiness, it involves realizing that God loves those people, the same way he loves us. And I love that insight as a way of, as a motivation, but I don't know if motivation is even the word I'm looking for, but as a way of making it a little easier to do.
Exactly. Like, I really wanted to, I think I associated holiness with rules and, guidelines and things like more about what not to do as opposed to what to do. And so, and I, a little side note about J.I. Packer, who I knew from our Regent days years ago. I always found him like super intimidating and, scary in every way, even though he was a kind man. But when I was starting to read his work on holiness, I found it so accessible and readable and almost earthy, actually, that helped me also kind of move forward in this conversation and think, this doesn't have to be about not drinking too much or dancing or whatever. This can be about dancing with someone who needs a dance partner, to stretch the metaphor.
So I'm always interested in the idea of loving your reader, right?
Yes.
One of the ways we know how to pursue our work as writers is, loving one's reader is a really helpful guideline for everything from how I structure a sentence, in a way that is accessible to what I write about. And that seems relevant to me, to the way you're talking about holiness as a matter of loving people. I don't know. I just like to tease out some of those ideas. Well, I want to hear you tease out these ideas. I guess.
Well, first of all, I love that you talk about that, because I think that is actually extremely profound, but also very, very practical. So I'm starting to coach writers more, which I really love to do. It's lots of fun. And I've been playing with the idea, and there's nothing like staggering about this idea, but that our posture impacts our practice. And I think that's what you're getting at. So when we love our readers enough to write really well and to do the deep and endless until it's too late work of revision, when they are foremost in our minds, our work literally gets better. Like we are giving them a gift, but we're also giving ourselves a gift as a writer, because we'll be better writers. Like our books will be better. Our articles will be better. And so I really love that idea. And then of course I think it also touches on the humility that helps us really embrace the collaborative nature of writing when it's at its best. That, we need our editors, we need our other readers, we need to, submit ourselves to that process that can be painful, but in the end, makes for a better piece or a better whatever it is we're creating. And then also there is a time where we love our readers enough to, reasonably defend our work, so say, well, I really do believe it's best written that way, or I wouldn't say it that way. And here's why. And so, that idea of our posture toward our work, making our practice and, product, if I can use that word, better in the end is just so beautiful and liberating, and everybody wins.
Yeah. Even on the question of revision, you mentioned revision. I find the question of loving your reader, or the idea of loving your reader, helpful there to think. So I sometimes have people ask me, how do you know when you're done revising? Besides, it's just time to turn it in, and your editor won't give you any more extensions. But there's a kind of revision that's about me. It's about me making sure I look as good as I can look. And then there's a kind of revision that says, am I going to serve my reader better? If I continue to tweak this, is that really serving my reader, or is that serving me?
That's good.
I inevitably reach a point where it's serving me, right? It's just me. Maybe I'm delaying for my own reasons, or I'm worried about what people are going to think of me, or whatever. But but if I can frame it in terms of, if I flip this sentence around, am I doing that so that it serves my reader better, or am I doing it for my own purposes? And as long as it's for the reader, I'm willing, let's keep on revising. But that's a good way to know.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yes. Let me tell you, when we were in revisions for The Minister's Wife, Bonnie, my editor, at one point said, and Sarah was the name of the publisher, and she said, Karen, Sarah's going to boil our head like cabbages if we make any more changes. So I was like, okay, I guess we're done. So the endless tweaking, definitely there has to be, sometimes that is about anxiety and insecurity. And, when we launch a book out into the world, or when, a book release, that word has more than one meaning. Like, we need to release our work at some point and trust the reader. So part of loving the reader can be trusting the reader that, they will understand what I mean. Not every line is a poem. That would be overwhelming. And trusting the process for sure. But so for me, I love revision, like love hate, but mostly love it, because that's when I know that my best writing will come, and I trust my editor to work with me to find the place where, at some point, I believe we start going down the other side of the mountain, right? Sure. We start, mucking around with things that were good enough, and we might make them worse. So
I love in an article you did for the Ecstatic Substack, you speak of the sweet surrender of handing something off to an editor, and then trusting the editor to help you make it better. I love that.
And I've really gotten better at that as the years have gone on, where I'm okay to submit a draft that I know will be made better. Like I think I referred to it as like an unbaked cake, or, the underpainting or something in that piece. And that's where we hope we have a good editor. And we quickly, I guess we figure out if we don't, and then we maybe have to work a bit harder.
Yeah, right. Well, some editors are just so overworked.
Yes, I think that's true.
That they, that they just don't have time to give their attention to a competent writer. They're so, maybe they're working harder on people who need more help. But okay.
Actually, if I can say one more thing about that, because if I am basically unedited, I feel less confident in my piece. Like I I like, don't tell me it's good to go. Like
Right.
I am skeptical that it's good to go.
Yes.
And, I may like, well, momentarily thrilled, but then, I think, well, it can't be that good. Like
Yeah.
it can't be that ready.
Right. No, I hear you. I completely get that. Okay. Here's another way of approaching the same questions we've been talking about, the connections between holiness and creative work. Holiness is a way of loving others. Writing is a way of loving others. You make the observation that as we love others, yes, we make things better for the people we love, but we also make things better for ourselves. We are participating in making the world a little more like the world we want to live in. Or you might say we're making the world a little bit more like the kingdom of God. And I love that idea. I love that insight. And I do think it's a lot of what we're doing when we do creative work is trying to, as we do work that matters to us, we are making the world look a little bit more like the world we want to live in. Or I guess we can also say, if I'm writing stuff that doesn't make the world more like the world I want to live in, what am I doing? Yeah. Wendell Berry said something like the success of work, I can't remember, he said writing, creative work, or just work is the health of the thing that it's about. I guess one thing I could have done is round up that quotation, but I didn't. But the idea that we judge work by the health of the thing that we write about. Are we making it healthier? Are we making the world healthier? One thing I can do is, if I devote my energy to certain kinds of marketing, for instance, that works on people's insecurities, I can make more money for myself, but I'm making the world not the kind of world I want to live in. And I feel like this is connected in some way to what you're saying about holiness.
Yeah. It's interesting because it is about sort of how we spend our time and how we spend our work and our energy. And I remember once taking a little writing gig where I was writing copy for ice cream cones that were dipped in like gold dust or something like that. And it was just this funny, weird thing happening in Toronto. And
real gold dust? Are you making this?
Yeah, no, it really was. Like there was, I would have to look it up along with that Wendell Berry quote, but it was something to do with gold and ice cream in a cone in Toronto. And after I thought, I don't know. I don't think I want to write about stuff like that, even though sometimes we take writing gigs that help us pay the bills, right? And they're not necessarily, and they enable us to do the work we really want to do. And so, as long as it doesn't cross any boundaries or whatever, that's probably okay to do as we're trying to make our way in the world. But I think there's something beautiful about how we make things and why, and how we are reflecting God, the maker, as we create. And, like smarter, more creative people than I have written so well about this stuff. But I remember reading Makoto Fujimura's book, Art and Theology, I think is the title. And that book kind of stopped me in my tracks about how I viewed myself as a writer, because I've been like kind of a hack for many years, and, a journalistic style writer, writing other people's stories and writing copy and just really trying to create an income, which I did manage to do. Like I've been a working writer since my first son was born 27 years ago. And I had this line, I would say sometimes, that I work on demand for hire or something. And I can't believe those words came out of my mouth, because for me, it was sort of a pride thing. Like I only write when I'm being paid to write. And, I'm a working writer, and boy, did I ever miss out on a lot over the years, I think, that I didn't discover until I went back and did an MFA in creative nonfiction when I turned 50. And that just transformed my writing life. Like, I'm allowed to write about, what I see outside my window and what I hear outside my window and what's inside my heart. And I just was
Yeah.
released. And that's how The Minister's Wife, my first book, came into the world. So, it's so beautiful to just do it, and take risks and be courageous and be humble and all those things together. Like we're so lucky.
Yeah.
Don't you think? I mean, wow, what
Sure.
a life.
Yeah. Like you, I did a whole lot of work for hire, through the years, and sometimes help put books in the world that I didn't. It's not that there's nothing really wrong with the books, but I didn't really feel like the world needed them.
Right.
And
Yeah.
um,
I will say, in case anyone wants to hire me, I do still do that.
because the bank still wants that mortgage payment every month.
Yes, exactly.
They can be so insistent. Okay. Now, the real reason I wanted to have you on this, well, there are many reasons I want to have you on the podcast, but the nudge that made me say I got to have Karen Stiller on is a piece that you had in the Ecstatic Substack, which is associated with Ecstasis Magazine, which is associated with Christianity Today. What was the name of that piece? Do you remember?
Oh, was it the book launch after the funeral? Maybe.
Yeah. No. Well, anyway, I commend listeners need to go dig this up. What's that?
That is the piece. Maybe it was Writing Through Sorrow, or I can't remember, but it was something along those lines.
Yeah. So good. And so you started writing Holiness here in July of 22, had made good progress on it. And then in January of 23, your husband died.
Yeah.
The minister, the title minister from The Minister's Wife.
Yeah. My hero, my muse.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then you had some thinking, you had some decisions to make. Are you going to finish this book or not? I guess an image, a very memorable image from that story, that essay is, you said that many people sent you flowers, but one of the entities that sent you flowers was your publisher. And that was the only bouquet that you brought up into your bedroom.
Yeah.
Why was that the one bouquet that you put into your bedroom?
Yeah. And I didn't know at the time, like I had to ask myself, why did I bring this one upstairs? And I realized because it gave me hope. It was a symbol of hope to me that as this new unwanted life began, that I was still a writer.
Yeah.
And that was fiercely who I was, and that I could hold on to that could be like a thread from what was to what is to what could be and will be. And that Brent would want that. My husband would have wanted that. He always said, I'm your number one fan. And he was just my biggest supporter always. And I remember interviewing another writer once, and she said that, because I'm always stealing this, so I want to credit her, but she'd say her husband had his hand at the small of her back, kind of nudging her forward. And that was very much what Brent was for me in my writing life. So yeah, it gave me hope. And then I wouldn't have, in those moments, I wouldn't have necessarily dreamt that I was going to finish the book. I was still unsure. It just felt like, my life had exploded.
Yeah.
But man, those flowers gave me hope.
Yeah. You said in that piece that if you started making a list of all the reasons not to write, it can be a really long list.
Yeah.
And so why did you keep going? I mean, you've started answering that question. I'd love to hear you say more about why you, if I don't know, if my knee hurts, I don't feel like I can write. Or if I'm mad at my wife, I'm like, I don't feel like writing today. I'm too mad to write.
I used to be like that too. Like when I was writing The Minister's Wife and doing revisions and stuff, my youngest son in particular sometimes he'd make me so mad. And like in the morning, I'd be like, I didn't say this, but I might be thinking, you've ruined my writing day.
Yeah.
Like I can no longer write. I'm in such a bad mood. And then, so here I was in, acute grief, choosing to re-engage with my book. And partly it was, again, that beacon of hope. So I thought in those winter months, I thought to myself, next year, like a year from now, in the spring of 2024, if I can keep doing this work, I'll be really glad I did.
Yeah.
I will be glad to have a book coming out, because that is, to me, that's a huge deal. Like I, sometimes I still can't believe that I've written 2 books. Like, what? Like, oh, there's been a mistake, And so I thought, that will be a bright light a year from now, and I'm going to need one. Like, I need a light off in the horizon to move toward. So that was, it was almost like, so like practical in a way. Like, I need hope, and this is hopeful, and I cannot take this, I can't blow this off. Yeah. But then I had to think, do I still, do I still believe in holiness? Like, do I still think this is true? Do I still trust God? Because my husband died very unexpectedly and, traumatically. He had had a kidney transplant that was successful. He lived a year with it. And then, very soon after, he just went to the hospital confused one day after a Zoom call with his, church guy. And he never came home again. And he had 7 cancerous lesions on his brain, which was a very rare side effect of transplant.
Oh, those 2 things were related.
Yeah. Yeah, they were related. It's called post-transplant lymphoma. So I can't remember the exact stats, but it's like under 1% of recipients. So it was like just this brutal ending. And yet we worked as hard as we could to make it as beautiful as we could for Brent. As he died, as we began to understand what was happening. So, that was part of, and I write about that in the book. I included a chapter on sorrow, which was its own decision, for sure, that I gave a lot of thought to. But I had to go back and think, where is the holy here in this mess? And as I revised the book and re-engaged with what I had already written, just to, can I still say this? Can my name still stand? Can I still stand here? And yes, I could, and I did, and I do, and I will. Just like belief, our beliefs, can be wiggly. And so to be confident in the wiggly that's okay. That's real life.
Yeah. Let's talk about that. You said you made a conscious decision. You were going to write. You decided you would write a chapter about sorrow.
Yeah.
And you quote Nadia Bolz-Weber.
Yeah.
Who says, "Write from your scars, not from your wounds." But you decided to write from a very open wound. I
did. Yeah. And let me put in a little plug for the Festival for Faith and Writing at Calvin College, which is where I heard Nadia say that. And I heartily agreed. I thought, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. Like, absolutely. You gotta.
That would have been in 22 that she said that?
Yeah, right? It would have been whenever. Yeah, was it? Okay.
They had it in 24, and I guess they have it every 2 years, right?
Yeah, this was pre-COVID for sure.
Oh, okay.
So,
gotcha.
So yeah. Okay. So it was a while ago. And then, well, number one, Brent was in the book. Like when I call him my muse, I'm kind of half joking, like he is a figure in my writing.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was that. And I felt like I would be lying. I felt like this will not be an honest book if I don't talk about his death. I just didn't see a way around it. And I talked with my agent about it, and she suggested maybe I put it in an epilogue. But it's like, oh, this isn't an epilogue. This is like the main event. Like that wouldn't have felt real either. And so, so I would say I generally went against the advice of people I trust. But I felt like I could trust myself with this story. And I wrote very carefully, and I kept my focus on holiness because I knew that was the only way I could do it well and not say things that I might not think in a couple of years. Like I knew that I didn't know what I didn't know yet about grief and sorrow. And so and I think I did it. And I showed it. I offered it to all my children. We have 3 adult children. One took me up on the offer, my eldest son, and he read it. And, it was okay with him. And if it was, because really my kids were a big concern for me. Like even the piece that you're referring to on Substack, I warned them, trigger alert. I wrote this thing, you don't have to read it. But I really go there. So I worried about their response. And then in the end, it's probably the chapter I'm the most proud of. Like it's tender, it's, honest. And I want it to do that for my husband. I want it to honor the holiness in his life and in his death that I think I saw, and just explore that with the boundaries. And again, trust my editor. Like I really trusted my editor.
Yeah. Yeah. So your husband died in January. When did you write that chapter? January of 23.
Yeah. So I will say that grief has robbed me of timelines. So I feel like I re-engaged, like my agent called me in probably late February and said, if you want to, we can get back on the timeline. Like she said, revision and editing time will be shortened. But we can get on, now Press has invited, said they'll take it anytime, but if you can, we can. And so that's when I decided to give it a whirl. So it probably was in early March. Like I think I did that first before I went back to those previous chapters, because it was just like, I need to do this work. Otherwise it's going to be this big looming, thing that might affect me in my ability to write. So what we were talking about earlier about like writing when you have a little tummy ache or whatever, and you don't feel like you can. I really had to trust my process and be gentle with myself. And I wrote in very short, maybe like an hour, maybe 2 hours. And then I would go for a walk. And, so I really had to guard my well-being. And I think I used the phrase, I finished it softly. And I did, like, I was very careful because I felt like I was barely surviving. And yet doing that work started to help me. It got me up, it got me moving, it got me reading, it got me walking, it got me thinking. And again, that sense of like, I'm still a writer. I am here. I am still a writer. And that means writers write. Like, that's the thing. Like, the reason I wrote that piece on Substack is because I had so many people saying to me, I can't believe you finished your book. I can't believe you did it. And sometimes I would start to feel a little, well, I was sad. Like it started to feel a little bit like, do you not know I was in deep grief? Like that, like I started to hear it in a bit of a, like I needed to defend my decision to write in that time a little bit, which may have just been me being weird. But I thought, no, I need to, well, how did I do it then? If this is so shocking, how did I do it? And, eventually it comes down to writers write. Writers write. That's what we do. That's how we understand the world. And that's our, tender, vulnerable, dangerous gift that we offer. And so, yeah, that's what I did.
Yeah. When you were writing about the idea of writing from your wound, you talk about, you say, don't waste the pain.
Mm.
And you also say, I'd love to hear you say more about this. Don't compartmentalize.
Yeah. So that's really, I'm probably going out on a limb because this is solely based on my experience of writing through great sorrow. Mm-hmm. But I realized that I couldn't forget and I couldn't compartmentalize. Like my pain was my entire compartment, and my entire compartment was filled with pain. Yeah. And so am I going to, if I try to shut that down and block that out, I am going to be blocked, and I don't believe in writer's block. So I use that phrase gently, but I'm not going to be able to do this work if I have to be in a good mood, because I'm not going to be in a good mood again for a very long time. And so it was a bit of like grit, like sheer grit, but grit, I had to use grit to pour myself a glass of water, like grit. And so I believe that I learned that, that all of that other stuff that's going on in our lives, it can be welcomed into our process. And that doesn't mean we have to write about it, but we are writing from it because it's just there. And so to fight it and to think to my, my youngest son, like, oh, you've made such a mess, I'm not gonna be able to write today. I wouldn't be like that now. Yeah. I wouldn't be like that now. I'd be able, I believe, to do my work no matter what, because sometimes we have to. And once we do, we learn we can. And I think that changes how we are as writers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, actually. Just the act of, I mean, you do talk in that article, again. I know you wrote a book, but,
it's okay. It's more fun to talk about the article.
You say you're not amazed that you finished. You said it's not amazing that I finished my book in the early months of grief. In the early months of grief, I finished it on purpose, like I did almost everything then.
Yeah.
And that act of, it makes perfect sense that the act of doing it made it clear to you that you could do it. And I'm sure could do lots of other things that you probably didn't think you could do.
100%. Yeah. One day I put the new windshield wiper fluid into my car out front of my house, and I did it. And how you let the hood slam down? Yeah. I guess that's what I do. And I literally turned around I was waiting for a round of applause or something, and of course, who cares? Nobody was watching, but I was like, oh my gosh, look what I just did. Yeah. So silly, but yeah, we learn what we can do.
Yeah.
But I will say, like, I've always been a writer who has found writing hard work. Like it is work, and good work, and there's joy in it, and there's like, even bliss, but it is work. And so I am a worker. Like, I am a worker bee writer. And that's how I've made my, trade as a writer. And I think that served me well during that time too. Like, I grew up in a put your nose to the grindstone setting. Okay. But I can also be really lazy. Don't get me wrong. But I think that kind of, that gritty, I'm going to get my hands dirty, and work helps us heal. I believe that. I've learned that, for me at least, that doing good work helps us get better. And I think that's good. And that doesn't mean I don't rest, and I'm all about self-care and all of that stuff, but movement and action. And, to get back to the book, that is part of the book, is that as we try a little bit, we do grow on the inside. Like, it's pretty simple. I'm not solving holiness. I'm not sure there's new things to be said there, but I'm exploring how the practice and the effort sometimes does lead us, into grace, the grace that is already there. So there are parallels there.
Well, one of the questions on my list that I skipped, but you answered anyway, was how has the writing life shaped your sanctification, and how has your sanctification shaped your writing life? And it sounds like you just addressed that question.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah. The only other thing I would add is that because I wrote, and I still do, like articles about other people, like, features, sort of articles, like, and almost always in this arena of faith and the church, telling the stories of the church, I would say that has so impacted me over the years, like other people's amazing stories. And so the power of story to encourage each other and keep each other, in the faith even, and just like, oh man, what people do because they believe is a beautiful thing. And so to be part of that storytelling tradition of the church has fed my faith over the years.
That's so good. All right. Last question. Who are the writers who make you want to write? And you have a lot of writer friends. That's the impression I get.
Yeah.
Is that true? You have a lot of writer friends?
I do, increasingly. Yeah, I think it's good to be friends with other writers. Yeah. They can really help you.
Your name comes up when I talk to other writers.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm
here and there.
That's nice to hear that. So this writer is not my friend, but I flatter myself by thinking we'd be best friends. And that is Anne Lamott. She's always been like, when I first read Anne Lamott, I was like, oh, you get to be that funny and that honest and that transparent. So she, I think, changed my view of what we can do as writers who have faith. And so that was, I always feel like I should, I could write after I read her.
Yeah. Bird by Bird is just, that might be my favorite book about writing I've ever read.
It's so good. Just today, before we did this, I was meeting with a writer that I'm coaching a little bit, and I had him read Bird by Bird, before our first meeting, and we kind of walked through it together. And I pointed out that it itself is just an example of great writing. It's about great writing, but it is great writing. Yeah. It's full of story. And then the other one I wanted to mention, just because I literally had this experience with Alice McDermott is her name. She's a novelist, and one of her recent books, Absolution, was so beautiful to me that I literally moved from her page to my page, and I wrote a piece that I really liked. And so this question that you ask, which again I find profound and practical, is that reading other people's great writing can and maybe should be part of our process. That and Scott Carnes, I'm not sure if I'm saying his last name right. Again, Festival of Faith and Writing. Yeah. He talked about his little stack of friends on his desk, and they were the books he reads before he starts to write to kind of prime the pump. And so I just love that. And Christian Wyman, so beautiful.
Yeah, he's so good. Well, that might be it. If you're done telling me about writers make you want to write, this podcast episode may be over.
I have enjoyed every minute of it. I could talk to you for another 3 hours, but no one would listen. So we should end it.
We probably should. But thank you so much, Karen Stiller. It's been great to have you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
The Habit Podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. You can support their work, including this podcast, by becoming a member. Visit rabbitroom.com/membership. Special thanks as well to Taylor Leonard for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for the Habit Podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorleonard.com. The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.